Next up, we're going to have Mayor, and he's going to talk about Wallaby and React. Round of applause for Mayor.
Is that legible at the back, or do you want to bump it up one more time? Is it okay? Bump it up? I'll try. Well, it doesn't give me much real estate, but we'll give it a shot. Okay, I'd like to just thank everybody for giving me this opportunity to have a little bit of a talk today about a particular tool which I've recently come across. I actually came across it about a year ago, and I started exploring it, didn't pay much attention to it, and then recently I kind of thought about it and I thought, geez, wouldn't that be helpful? So I sort of dug it up, and man, it has made my life so much easier. So we're going to talk a little bit about unit testing, okay, and how to make unit testing easier. Now, you know, maybe this is a bit of an unfair question, but I'd like to basically just get a gut feel of how many people here actually unit test their code. Right, now how many of those people actually go out to the network when they unit test their code? And how many of those people actually go out to the file server or see databases when they go out to their code? So unit tests are actually quite an interesting thing. It's one of those black arts. You have to basically take it alongside with Hogwarts, you know, and along with sort of other black arts type of magic. And you've got to learn about things like spies and marks and all sorts of other weirdities. Okay. But from my experience, what I've found is that in order to actually write good unit tests, you've got to be an expert. You actually have to know the code inside out. You've got to know JavaScript backwards. You've got to know what the events are basically going to throw off. You're going to know what fetch basically returns back. You have to do this in order for you to actually write good tests. So essentially, there's a problem with this paradigm because essentially everybody is supposed to write unit tests and everybody is supposed to do test-driven development, but not everybody's an expert. And there's this shift and this gap. And I find that when I go from different enterprises, from enterprise to enterprise, I'm a consultant, I find that people say they do test-driven development, but it's actually quite rare. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you something, a couple of tools that I use, and I'm hoping that that actually helps. All right, enough of the intro. All right, what we're going to be doing today. Just by the way, this is the company I currently work for, Essential Energy. I was with Kogan for a while. They were very good, awesome group. Now I'm with these guys, Essential Energy. Just 2 seconds. If you're essentially a really gun developer, you're full stack, and you like the idea of working remotely at home, come and see me afterwards. All right, but that's not why I'm here. Okay. Really, really, really. All right, so what are we going to be doing? We're going to be doing Jest. I'm sure everybody over here has done at least one create React app in their life, and therefore they should know what Jest is because Jest is built in. All right, test runner, as well as, it's basically it does, what's it called, assertion library and so on and so forth. Okay, then of course we've got this guy over here, which has been sort of mentioned before, and that's essentially Enzyme. And Enzyme allows us to do things like shallow rendering, so we can basically create our component on the fly and test it on the fly, which is pretty cool. All right, and then essentially we've got this guy called Wallaby, okay? And today I'm going to show you what this guy is and why you would probably want to invest in it. All right, so let's get started. So I don't have a lot of slides. In fact, I've got no slides. I do have 1 or 2 pictures, but there is a little bit of setup that one has to do in order for Wallaby to work and for Enzyme to work, especially if you're on the new React 16. So I'm not going to basically spend a lot of time going through that because that's not the purpose of this talk, but I will basically show it to you anyway. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how I set this up. Just bump this up a bit. That good? Yeah, can you see it? All right, cool. So you can see over here, we've got a couple of different things that we started with. We said create React app, all right? And I basically gave it a name, and then I CD'd into that, and then essentially I started my code editor, okay? Right, then I installed some dependencies. Now, notice over here, all right, I got my Basat. I've got a lot of respect for this gentleman, by the way. He's actually done some tremendous stuff for the community. You notice over here, I'm actually installing the TypeScript definition, even though this is a JavaScript project. And I recommend that you do that, because if you're using something like Visual Studio Code, or if you're using something like Atom or WebStorm, that's going to give you IntelliSense on your Jest objects. So that's going to make your life a heck of a lot easier. Then I'm installing Enzyme and its dependency to basically say it's React 16. All right, I'm also basically installing a little sort of third-party library tool just because I wanted to display something and I didn't want to have to create every single component on my own. And that's essentially the entire installation. All right, so that's essentially what we have. All right, let's go have a look at the project structure. Then essentially a little bit more setup. And yeah, you know, the thing is, right, whenever we basically get into tools, we have to be very careful about what tools we want, because we don't want to sit there basically maintaining tools and configuration all the time. Granted, this is something that, you know, if you're going to use Enzyme, you need a little bit of configuration. Wallaby, you need a little bit of configuration. The good thing is, once you get it, you're done. You don't have to think about it again. All right, so you have to do this, right? And if you're ever going to use if you're ever going to use Enzyme on any React 16 or Create React app, you need this guy. I'm just going to actually just collapse this. I'll open this later. Just collapse that. You need this guy. All right, so where did I get this from? It's just essentially, you can see it's just configuring Enzyme. Where did I get that from? I got that from the Enzyme website. The only difference between the Enzyme website and this, by the way, is that I'm actually using Node imports, not using ES6. And the reason for that is because I find it plays better with Wallaby. And that's the only reason. Okay, so then once you've got that, you need to have this Wallaby.js file. If you want to know where I got this guy from, I'll just show you very quickly, just so that it's easy for you. You essentially go to the Wallaby website, you go to docs, you go down to Jest, oh no, sorry, you go down to JSX, which is over here. And then you basically look at the Create React app, and that's essentially the same configuration. Okay, so you just copy it straight out of there. Okay, you can take 2 minutes to read it. It's basically saying, these are my files, these are my test files, how do I find them with glob patterns, blah, blah, blah. But that's essentially all there is to that. Good, all right, so last but not least, I've got this little thing which we'll basically introduce a bit later. This is just a little service that I have running in the background. It's not very, very interesting or important. It's just basically giving me a little cat poem, and it's basically sitting on port 3003. Good, and I think that's pretty much all we need to worry about. Okay, so now let's start off with writing our unit tests. This is essentially why we're here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically go ahead and push that there, and we don't need that anymore. Okay, so I've got a very simple little starting point. I didn't want to have to type all of this out. I will type a lot out today, but you know, you'll forgive me if I don't type everything out right off the bat. Okay, so this is basically just proving that Enzyme is configured. You can see over here that I've got essentially a little bit of a test over here that basically just creates a wrapper, a shallow wrapper, and then says, oh, it's truthy, which means, yeah, I got something out of it and my code didn't blow up. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go to terminal, and I'm just going to type, oh, by the way, if you ever do this, Jest, it's going to blow up. It's not going to work. And the reason for that is because it doesn't know how to read those configuration files we did earlier. So we're just going to do npm test. And voila. Let's see, did that pass? Yes, awesome. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to basically close that because I don't need that anymore. So essentially, Enzyme is correctly configured. Okay, so Wallaby. Let's get on to the main topic of this conversation. All right, Wallaby is a tool that you install. It comes in a variety of different packages for a variety of different IDEs, including Visual Studio, WebStorm, Atom, you know, take a pick. It's got a variety of different ones, and it looks like this in Visual Studio Code. Okay, and by the way, if you don't use Visual Studio Code, try it out. It's just freaking awesome. Okay, so there is Wallaby, okay, and you need that installed. It does come with a bit of a license, so you have to pay for it, okay. It's not very expensive, okay, and you'll see that it does actually give you a lot of productivity in return. And they're not paying me anything for this, okay, but promise. But if you want to basically utilize it without a license, that's fine. You can do that too. Just every couple of minutes, like every hour or something like that, it's going to say, hey, you're using a non-licensed version. Do you want to continue the trial? You say, yes, please. You carry on. Yes, please. Yes, we can. So that's what you do, all right? So once you've done that, okay, you go to F1 and you say start Wallaby. And what you're going to notice is if everything is, the demo gods are kind to me today, you're going to notice these little green dots coming up on the side, okay? So what is Wallaby doing? Wallaby is actually running my code as I'm actually looking at it, okay? So now we come to the first test, all right? And this is essentially one of the first problems that coders run into when they're writing test-driven development, because we all know we're supposed to write tests first, right? So they go, what? Yeah? So no, you don't write your tests first. That's actually a misnomer. That's wrong. No, somebody's going to shoot me for that. For sure. No, you design first, okay? You actually have your thoughts laid out first. That's what you're supposed to do. So essentially, let's have a look at what I have here. This is what I want to build. Okay, this is what the marketing managers have come back to me and said, this is what they want. They think this is going to be the next big Facebook. Okay, essentially what it is, it's a little blurb. Okay, it comes from a network call, right? So essentially we're going to do a fetch, and we're going to do it without actually fetching anything. And once we've gotten that back, we're going to render it on the screen. Okay, and then what's going to happen is I've got this little text box up here, and if I start typing in it, I want the thing to become bold. Whatever I'm typing, it's just going to do a little bit of a regex expression, and it's going to basically just shine it out. Like just search and stuff like that. That's the purpose of this. Now, you'll have to forgive me. I was trying to find something I could build in like 20 minutes, okay, which was as real world as possible, and this is the best I could come up with, okay. So one who has actually done any sort of React coding for any length of time will probably start thinking about how are they going to build this thing, and they might come up with this sort of an idea. Now, I'm not saying you have to design things every single time. You could probably just think about this in your head, but you do need to understand what you're doing. You might think about it something like this. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically go component mount, and then I'm going to fetch data, and then I'm going to store all the results, and then I'm going to set state, and then I'm going to render. It's very straightforward. We've all done this a million times, okay? But this gives us an idea as to what our first test might actually look like. Then, essentially, we've got another sort of flow that we want to do. Text input changed. Then we're going to update this, update text from the original text. Then we're going to set state, and we're going to go ahead and render. Okay? So that's essentially the kind of philosophy or the design that I want to build. I'm not going to do Redux or anything else like that. It's just plain old state. So I see here at least 2 tests without testing for failures or anything else like that. All right, so now I come back to my test. All right, so if you're ever getting stuck at this point, that's what you've got to do. You've got to basically rethink about what you're actually trying to do. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to say, right, we're going to do that first column, right? It fetches and renders. Okay, and we're basically going to start off with a little bit of a unit test over here. Okay, cool. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to basically wait for component.mount to actually launch. So essentially I'm going to get a wrapper. I'm just going to copy and paste that. Oh, isn't that cool? It's basically telling me how fast it is. At the moment, it's basically 1 millisecond. All right, so essentially I want component.mount to actually fire. So I'm going to say wrapper.instance. If you are unfamiliar with Enzyme, I know that this might be a little bit of a, in terms of, whoa, what the hell is he doing? Well, this is how we, just go along with the flow. If you are familiar with Enzyme, this will be familiar to you. If you're not familiar with Enzyme, this is how I'm basically going to get an instance of my class. So I'm going to say, and then from here I can say component.mount. Now you notice I'm getting a lot of IntelliSense. That's from that TypeScript library. So I say component.mount. All right, so, oh, it broke. Okay. Well, let's see. What actually happened here? Oh, it says type error. Reference. And component is not a function. And that's absolutely true. We haven't actually said component.mount yet. So let's go ahead and actually do that. Oh, by the way, I've got a broken test. Yes. Okay. Component.mount. And it goes green again. Okay. Very cool. All right. So now what we basically want to do is we want to fetch. Okay. So we might do something like this. We might say expect fetch dot to be called with. And this is pretty good because what will basically happen here is it'll basically enforce that I'm basically giving the right network calls. So I'm going to come back to this browser here, and I'm just going to grab this over here, get message. And I'm going to put that in there. Control V. Oops, no, I didn't do that. Okay, I'll just type it. Get, was it get dash message? Just want to double check. That's not what I wanted to do. Control Z. Get dash message. Sorry about that. All right. Get dash message. Okay. Now it's basically saying expected a mock function. Okay. So I am not going to sit there and create a mock for you right now because I'm limited for time. So I'm going to copy one instead, and I'll just explain it to you. So right off the bat, what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically just do this. And this is how we do this sort of thing in Jest. We overwrite the global variable. We basically say, fetch is no longer what we think it is. It's actually what we want it to be. Okay. So windows.fetch is basically a Jest mock function, which I'm going to be passing in a URL, and it returns a promise, which is going to resolve to an object, which has something called JSON inside it, which basically returns a promise and with a message. Okay, so not very complicated if you understand how fetch works, but as I said before, this is the problem with unit testing. You have to know the code inside out. You have to know how fetch actually functions. Okay, so when you call fetch, you basically got to say, promise me a fetch, and then once you do that, you're going to say, all right, there's a streamer in there, either a JSON or a text function. I need to get that information. It's another promise. All right, so let's have a look at this. Okay, so expected fetch to be called, expected mock to have been called, get message, but was not called. Okay, so that message has changed. Let's go ahead and have a look at this side over here. Let's get that to work now. All right, so I'm going to basically say const result is equal to, actually, let's make that small, fetch, and we're basically going to say get message. Okay, now I might be thinking to myself, holy cow, what is this thing returning? Especially if I'm not unfamiliar with mocks and with Jest and with fetches, whatever. So what Wallaby actually does is it allows me to basically say / question mark. And it's going to basically say to me, look, you know, what you're actually going to get back out of that is a promise. And that promise has basically got something called a JSON, which is actually a function. Okay, and it's basically evaluating three things, that, and the result. So that's why you basically have three different things over here. Okay, so that's pretty cool. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to basically say const result JSON is going to be equal to my result. Now, that's going to fail, obviously. Why? Because it's essentially a promise. Okay, now I'm a big sync await fan, all right, and there's nothing wrong with going to a component mount and just basically saying async. This is really easy. I don't know why people make it so complicated. All right, and then I'm going to say await. And I wonder what my result is. Well, my result is essentially something called, oh, that was a bit silly, wasn't it? So it's result.json. What is my result? My result is an object called message with the cat set on the mat. Straightforward. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, cool. So now I probably want to store that variable locally. Now, I could go ahead and just update state, but what you're going to find is when you're basically getting something from the network, okay, in my experience, it's a good idea to basically keep that somewhere. And the reason for that is because if you mutate it directly, if you basically push it into state and you start basically doing manipulation, you lose the original state. It's not such a good thing. So it's a better idea. Keep your original string, and then essentially, if you're going to do manipulations, then have a result from what that is, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to bold those cats, yeah? All right, cool. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say message, or let's call it original message, shall we? original message, and we're going to start off with basically saying that that is equal to an empty string. Okay? All right. And over here, we actually want to, I'm just looking at this. This is a passing test. We want this to fail as soon as possible. But anyway, we'll just do this right now. Right, we'll say this dot original message is going to be equal to result JSON dot message. And again, if I want to basically see what that is, I can just look at that way. Okay, so there's a little bit of magic happening there. So let's get our test to fail. Well, basically what we want to have happen is we want this markdown over here, this component to basically have its the initial state of the message that came through. All right, so let's go ahead and make a test for that because we want a failing test. So I'll just move this up here. And we'll basically go ahead and say, right, so what I've done is I've just imported Markdown as an import over here. So I want to find it, so I'm going to say wrapper.find, not filter, find. And I'm going to find the Markdown element, okay? And I'm going to push that into an object or a variable. So I'm going to say const Markdown is equal to that. And you can see it's parsing, okay? But it might be, did I actually get what I wanted? Again, let's go ahead and expect. Well, I can see I've got one result in there. So let's go ahead and also just check to see that our markdown dot props dot source is equal to, well, actually just do an expect, shall we? And that needs to be this string that we have over here. All right, cool. So we're still having a failing test. Let's have a look at why. Expected value to be the cat sat on the mat, but received undefined. Okay, and that's because we probably haven't set state yet. So let's go ahead and set state. So this dot set state. So one of the nice things about this type of style of testing is you fail, you pass, you fail, you pass, you fail, you pass. It's kind of cool. You can basically just keep on going backwards and forwards. Yeah. So we're going to set this dot state to basically message, which we don't have yet. So let's go ahead and actually do before we do anything else. All right, state is equal to, and we're going to say message. And we're going to default it to an empty string. And now we can see on this side, but received an empty string. You see that? No, mouse is not working. But anyway, it is an empty string. There. Okay, cool. We all saw that. All right, so this dot set state, message, to be, let's go ahead and just call it this dot original message. Okay. Curly brackets, oh yes, of course. Sorry, thank you. Still getting used to the Mac keyboard. The one thing I don't like about Macs are the keyboards. Sorry. Don't hit me. Okay, now this is still failing, okay? And, we'll basically have a look and see why it's failing. All right, received nothing. In other words, right, nothing happened when our state updated. And there's actually a good reason for that, okay? The reason for that is because there's actually two reasons for that, right? The first one is, right, when this async function got called, okay, what happened was it basically went through to that first await over there, and then basically just came back, and the rest of this code got called. So obviously it didn't work. So not very difficult to actually, not very difficult to resolve. You just basically come in over here and you say await, and that's going to break. And the reason why it's going to break is, it should break. Yeah, you can see it's broken. In other words, you can see all my stuff has disappeared. And the reason for that is because it doesn't know how to basically resolve a weight, and the reason for that is because this is not an async function. So it's very easy to fix it, just basically make this an async function. And everything's back. Okay. So, so it's still broken. And if we have a look at the message, it's basically telling us that it's still an empty string. And the reason for why it's still broken is because once we're actually gone ahead and component did mount, because this is just a little shallow renderer, it's not a full-blown React with all the bits and pieces built into it. It actually hasn't re-rendered the render method. So we need to actually tell it to do that. This is one of those things about Enzyme that you need to understand. So let's go ahead and say wrapper.update. Boom, it's all green. Okay. So let's go ahead and, do we have enough time to do one more? You guys, is it cool with you? Yeah, one more? All right, cool. Because now we basically get into some, the next text, and we'll basically have a look at one or two other things. So let's go ahead and say it, and we remember our code flow right at the beginning, the second thing, we wanted to basically update if the text input changed. So, so it updates on text change. Now, I could go ahead and basically did the whole component at mount and component update and blah, 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 but that all works, so I'm not going to retest that. What I'm going to simply do is I'm going to create another wrapper over here. And I'm going to set the state directly. So wrapper dot set state, well actually, I don't need it to set state. I just need to basically have my instance. And I want to basically set this original message. All right, and that is going to be equal to this message over here, the cat said on the mat. Okay, all right, so now what we want to do is we want to put some keys and we want to fire this text box, this input over here. We want to basically see if we can get that to actually fire, okay, and change our code. So what we'll do is we'll basically go wrapper.find. And I've got a bit of a class that's going to identify it. So we're going to get our search input. Okay. And that's going to be our input. All right. And again, just zoom in. If we basically want to, we can just have a look and see what we get back. We get one result back. So that's pretty cool. All right. And now what we're going to do is we're going to say input, dot simulate. In other words, I want to simulate that I'm typing inside there. And the type of event that I want to actually capture is going to be called a change event. And what does it basically pass in? And this is one of those whole, well, you've got to be an expert to actually do test-driven development. Sorry about that. We want to basically pass in something called a target, which basically has a value, right, which has cat. Okay, now that we've done that, let's go ahead and break our test, okay? Because essentially once we've done that, then we want to essentially get our markdown again. So I'm just going to copy this. And this time what we want is we want the source to be something a bit different. So I'm just going to copy that as well. So what we want this to be is something that looks a bit like this. The bold cat sat on the mat. And that's just markdown basically saying it's going to be bold. Okay. Right, so let's go ahead and see if we can get this test to pass. Bear with me guys, we're coming close to the end. Okay, so we've got this function over here, text changed. I'm just going to go ahead and make an instance of that. And, there's lots of discussion out there about, bindings with React. Just use arrow functions. It's so easy. So text is equal to E, which basically goes to there. That's it. I don't have to worry about bindings, this.bind, blah, constructors, whatever. It just works. And what I can do here is I can say, what is E? And I can see, oh yeah, E has basically got target and value. So that's essentially what Wallaby is bringing to the actual table over here. Okay, which basically makes it super easy for me to do something like this. Let's go ahead and say const, let's destructure it out, value is equal to e.target. And we can basically, one of the other things you can do with Wallaby is you just come and put it on a new line and it'll tell you what it is. Okay? Awesome. So we've got the cat. All right, now what we need to do is we need to basically pick up the original message and we need to basically set our state to a new message. So let's go new, or let's go const new message is going to be equal to this. Well, before we do that, let's go ahead and do this. Regex is going to be equal to a new regex pattern. All right, and what we want to do is we want to basically get the value, which is this thing here. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to basically eventually replace that with, oh yeah, and then of course we want to essentially say that we need it globally, so that, you know, if there's multiple instances of cat in the string, we don't just want to get the first one. This is why we use regex. Okay, and we can also do things like case insensitive, but whatever. Okay, cool. So now what we need to do is we need to say const new string is equal to this dot original message. And remember that we actually set it in our test. So it's over there on that side. And that's why it's going to be this, which is pretty cool. Okay, dot replace. And we want to replace value. Actually, we want to replace the new regex expression with something that looks a bit like this. So it's going to be something like this. Star, star, well, star, 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 dollar value. All right, and let's see what that actually looks like. So we can very easily inspect that. And it says the cat's out on the mat. Awesome. Awesome, very good. So now what we can do is we can do the last step, which is basically this dot set state. And we want to basically say message. And of course we need to have it in a, it's going to be this new string. How easy was that? Let's test it and let's see. Oh, thank you. All right, let's, one thing I forgot to do. Does anybody know what I forgot to do? I didn't save it, not once. Okay, so don't forget to do that. Otherwise, you might open it in the browser and say, why is it broken? And that'll be the reason. Okay, just one thing worth of interest, okay? Jest is actually broken at the moment, but I'll show you that to you in a minute. But let's just go ahead and test this anyway. So let's go ahead and bring up the terminal. Let's get a new terminal. And we'll say npm start. Yeah, go ahead, put in a new port for me. All right, so I can see that it's rendered all right, and it's basically fetched our stuff. Okay, let's go ahead and bump up the font a little bit so we can see if this is going to work. And we'll say C-A-T, yay! All right, that's it. So just a little word of caution, right? If I come back here to my Jest test, all right, is that still passing? Okay. Let's just basically double check that. Yeah, it's still passing. Okay, sometimes you find, specifically depending on how you write your tests, you find that your mock functions sometimes break depending on where they are. And it's got to do with the way that Jest works in terms of it's trying to basically find where to basically overwrite this thing, and sometimes it'll call the render method before it calls it, whatever. All right. Oh, that's why it's working. I've got it globally. That's one of the ways that you can basically just fix it. Just make it global. If you take this out, just a word of caution, right? So essentially, if you basically take that out, then you probably find, yeah, my test is broken. Okay, so yeah, it's a bit of a black art. Okay, mocks are just that way. You got to fight with them a little bit until you actually get to know them. And then, of course, you don't want to basically sit there with this global, so you're going to basically encapsulate it into a function, and you're going to pass your payload into it, and then it gets a little bit more there, but we're not going to do that tonight. Okay, cool. So, but that's essentially the gist of it, and that's Wallaby. There's a couple of other things which are pretty interesting. If I basically come to output, this is the last bit, and I go to Wallaby console, okay, you'll notice over here I've got my output, which basically indicates what's going on. So if I break my code and it doesn't work, you can see it along the line, like I did there in the red. Also, right at the beginning, you've got this little interesting URL that comes up, which I must show you before we end off. And this is essentially the test runner. And it can tell you basically what you've actually run. It basically tells you what your code coverage is, how many have failed, how many passed. My code coverage is 100%. It's awesome, and it's working on Jest. Pretty cool, huh? Thank you, that's it.